Beginning of May 1945, the Second World War in Europe had just come to an end. The Americans, despite their victory, were acutely aware that their triumph was partly due to the severe depletion of the German army on the Eastern Front, where the fiercest battles had taken place. As such, the Americans were eager to interrogate captured German generals, extracting all possible information to understand how Germany had managed to resist the combined might of the Soviet Union, Great Britain, the United States, and their respective allies for so long. Additionally, they sought to learn from German military tactics to enhance their own forces, especially with an eye on potential future conflicts with the Soviet Union. The U.S. military intelligence, recognizing the value of German military expertise, set up detailed and rigorous interrogation sessions to glean as much strategic and tactical knowledge as possible. Among the captured generals, Heinz Guderian stood out due to his significant involvement throughout nearly every phase of the conflict. Guderian, known as one of the primary architects of Blitzkrieg, was of particular interest to the Americans. His insights were invaluable, having served as the chief of the General Staff of the German Army just 2 months prior. Thus, at the end of May 1945, Guderian underwent his first interrogation of military significance. The Americans were particularly interested in his experiences and strategies, given his reputation for innovation in armored warfare and his prominent role in several major campaigns. Guderian's strategic mind and first-hand knowledge of the German High Command's inner workings made his testimony particularly valuable. One of the initial topics discussed was the German failure to defend Normandy and Guderian's perspective on why the Allies succeeded in their invasion. Guderian acknowledged that several mistakes were made in the German preparations for the Allied invasion of France. However, he emphasized that the primary factor in the Allies' success was the failure of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. He elaborated that the Allied fighters were superior to their German counterparts, who were technologically behind. The limited presence of the Luftwaffe during the Battle of Normandy granted the Allies total air superiority, which crippled German communications and paralyzed their defensive efforts. The lack of air cover allowed the Allies to execute their plans with minimal disruption, ensuring a steady flow of reinforcements and supplies. Guderian also placed significant blame on Adolf Hitler, who, according to him, restricted his generals' autonomy and retained direct control over key panzer divisions. This micromanagement prevented effective and timely responses to the Allied invasion. Furthermore, Guderian criticized the over-reliance on the Atlantic Wall, arguing that the German strategy should have included more robust secondary defensive lines further inland, which could have provided a more resilient defense. He believed that a more flexible and layered defense strategy would have significantly delayed the Allied advance and potentially altered the course of the campaign. The failure to adapt and decentralize command decisions in the face of rapidly changing battlefield conditions was a critical error that Guderian highlighted. The discussion then shifted to the Eastern Front, particularly the defense strategies around the Vistula River at the end of 1944. Guderian noted that, similar to the Western Front, there was no fortified defensive line capable of withstanding the final Soviet offensive. He emphasized his efforts to prevent the Soviets from penetrating into Germany by concentrating forces along the Vistula. However, the Luftwaffe's presence on the Eastern Front was almost non-existent. Despite this, Guderian pointed out that Soviet aviation lacked the coordination of the British and American air forces, suggesting that even a small, well-coordinated German air force could have been more effective on the Eastern Front. He argued that better utilization of available air resources could have slowed the Soviet advance and bought critical time for German ground forces. Guderian was particularly critical of Heinrich Himmler's appointment as Commander-in-Chief of Army Group Vistula, calling it a catastrophic decision. Despite the front already being widely penetrated, Himmler's lack of military experience exacerbated the situation. In light of these challenges, Guderian sought peace on one of the combat fronts. He engaged in numerous discussions with Joachim von Ribbentrop, Albert Speer, and even Joseph Goebbels. According to Guderian, they all agreed that seeking a diplomatic solution was the best course of action, but Hitler's refusal rendered it impossible. Guderian's efforts to broker peace reflected his recognition of the dire military situation and the need for a pragmatic approach to avoid total collapse. Guderian also addressed the German response to the anticipated Soviet offensive at the end of 1944 or the beginning of January 1945. He asserted that those in charge of the Eastern Front were well aware of the impending Soviet attack, but Hitler dismissed these warnings, believing that the Soviets would need more time to regroup after their summer offensives in 1944. Consequently, Hitler redeployed a significant portion of the forces Guderian had been amassing on the Eastern Front to the west. These units were intended to participate in the Ardennes offensive and reinforce the Ruhr Basin, which had been threatened by the Allies for months. Guderian viewed this as another grave mistake by Hitler. He argued that the Ruhr Basin, already devastated by Allied air raids, had low production, whereas regions like Upper Silesia near the Eastern Front still housed active mines and industries. The reallocation of forces weakened the Eastern Front at a critical moment, allowing the Soviets to launch a successful offensive with relatively little resistance. When asked about the Ardennes offensive, Guderian expressed his skepticism about its chances of success from the outset. He had no choice but to dedicate his attention to it, recognizing it as Germany's last chance to avert catastrophic defeat. His most powerful armored units were committed to the offensive, and he closely monitored their status and situation. By December 20th, for days after the offensive began, Guderian believed it should have been called off. It was evident that American resistance was much stronger than anticipated, making it impossible to achieve the operation's objectives. However, the offensive continued under Hitler's orders, and by the time the decision was made to reinforce other sectors, it was already too late. Guderian's critical assessment of the Ardennes offensive underscored the miscalculations and over-optimism that plagued German high command decisions in the final stages of the war. Before concluding, Guderian shared personal opinions on several prominent German generals. While the details of these opinions were not fully documented, it is known that Guderian held strong views on the competence and decisions of his peers. His critiques and insights provided the Americans with a deeper understanding of the internal dynamics and strategic failures within the German high command. Guderian likely discussed the capabilities, strengths, and weaknesses of generals such as Erwin Rommel, Erich von Manstein, and others, offering a candid evaluation of their contributions and errors during the war. These personal insights added another layer of depth to the Americans' understanding of the German military's operational and strategic framework. In summary, Guderian's interrogations in May 1945 shed light on the critical errors and strategic missteps that contributed to Germany's defeat in World War II. His detailed analysis of key battles and decisions offered valuable lessons for the American military, both in understanding the past conflict and preparing for potential future confrontations. The knowledge gained from Guderian's insights played a role in shaping post-war military strategies and doctrines, emphasizing the importance of flexible command structures, integrated air-ground operations, and the necessity of realistic strategic planning in the face of evolving threats.